So on the handout, what we've been talking about is the British going all around the world, and today what we're talking about is the British Empire working in India. And on the handout, the part that we're going to be looking at right now, the part of the handout that we're looking at now is we see that the British are working in India, and they're really going to be transforming India in big ways. It says on the handout that the end of the Mughal, that you might remember, one of the last times we talked about the Indian Empire, that the Mughal, it used to be this Hindu, Muslim, Indian empire started by this guy named Babur, and it was later mixed up ethnically by Akbar, as he was okay with Hindus and Muslims intermarrying. But the bummer for India is that the Indian Empire is actually in decline, and that opened the way for Europeans to come into the Indian subcontinent. And there's a vocabulary word that you should know. There's a group of guys called company men, and these were the very first Europeans who came into India, and they came in order to persuade Indian rulers to establish, you'll write down on the handout, trading posts to be able to trade. They wanted to be able to set up all along the coast of India these trading posts where they would be able to do business. Well, with these white Europeans moving to India, there was some concern it may not be safe. You know, you're in a new place, you've never been here before, and they want to hire kind of like bodyguards, or even more than bodyguards, like they want to hire personal armies to protect them from other Europeans and from dangers that exist in India. And so we have the rise of something called the Sepoys. It says on the handout, in order to protect themselves from other Europeans, they hired, you'll write down, Indian soldiers. And that's what a sepoy is. A sepoy is an Indian soldier that is working for the British to protect the British. And we're going to see that these sepoys are going to become really important. They're going to be well paid, but later, because they feel the British aren't taking them seriously, the sepoys are going to get ready to rebel. On the handout, we see a general transition of British rule, that the British presence in India starts off with a company, a corporation called the British East India Company. We've actually seen this before. We saw that some of the first Europeans to get involved in China were private companies. We saw some of the very first Europeans to get involved in Asia were corporations like the British, like the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. Well, we see the exact same thing in India with not the VOC, not the Dutch East India Company, but the British East India Company. And they're going to continue this trend of expanding power all throughout India. And part of this transition happens at a battle called the Battle of Plassey. It says on your handout, this is where 3,000 British troops, you'll write down, 3,000 British troops defeated an Indian army of 50,000. Now, if you look at this situation where you have 3,000 British soldiers defeat 50,000 Indian soldiers, what might account for that disparity? What's that? Guns. Yeah, guns. It may not be that the Indians have no guns, but the British definitely have better guns. Yeah. The British have better guns. So you have 3,000 British soldiers defeating a much larger Indian army of 50,000. This is the general trend we've seen. This helps explain what we've called the Scramble for Africa. This helps explain what we've seen with the Americans taking over Hawaii and taking over the Philippines. This kind of explains this general trend. Definitely explains why the United States was able to take land from Native American people. So below this, we have a section called Raj and Rebellion. And Raj is the name of the British Empire in India. The British are going to be moving to India. And here on this map, you see them holding the British flag. We see them entering into India in a way that they never have before. And for the British, this is the perfect time because the British have lost the 13 colonies and they're looking to expand to a different part of the world. And there's a lot of money to be made in India. We'll write down that there are some challenges, though, to the British coming in. It says on the handout that once it was really just this company that was ruling, this British East India Company that was ruling. And the problem was that they were ruling over a population that was larger than that in Western Europe. We'll write down Western Europe in the blank. What I mean by that is that the British are operating through a company, a control over millions of people, more and more people than actually live in England. This one company, the British East India Company, is kind of flexing its muscles and trying to control. And that's going to be a very challenging thing. The British don't agree with everything that they see in India. For sure, they don't agree with the two main religions in India. What are the two main religions? First of all, the majority religion, 80% or so. No. It is Hindu. India, you should know some basic takeaways, is that India is a Hindu majority. This is the belief in reincarnation. This is the belief in polytheism. You might remember they have actually 300 million gods in Hinduism. They believe in reincarnation. They believe in the caste system. That is like a basic takeaway you should all have about India. The minority religion, maybe 15% of the population, is Muslim, though. But that's only after Muslims conquered and took over India. Regardless, the British are not fans of Hinduism or Islam. They're not fans of either one. But you know what? The British are a ridiculous minority, and they are not going to be able to force the Indian people to reject these beliefs. We're going to write down that they had what's called pragmatic toleration on your handout. They had to show toleration for religious beliefs. They had to show toleration on your handout for religious beliefs. What I mean by this on your handout is that they're not going to be able to force people to change their religion. There's just really too many of them. Well, on the handout, the next line, it says, benefits of empire. So on your handout, it says the British were pouring millions of dollars, and there's three things that we're going to write down. Number one, they are pouring millions and millions. There's 2 pages total. Make sure you have 2 pages. They're pouring millions and millions of dollars into 3 things. We'll write down railroad, telegraph, and roads. Railroad, telegraph, and roads. That's infrastructure. That's actually them building something. Now, why would the British build railroads? Why would the British build telegraph and just streets and stuff like that? I mean, we have a couple choices. One reason we could say is that the British people just had a deep-seated love for the Indian people, and they just wanted to be kind and okay, so we're not feeling that as like the reason. There's got to be a reason. How could you benefit? How can the British benefit? How could they make money by building rail and telegraph lines? Well, India is a big place. And if you look at India, it's a big place. If I look at India and I am growing stuff, if I have cotton or other raw materials, how am I going to get this cotton? How am I going to get this raw material from these cities to the coast where there's ports and there's ships? Well, I could either put them on the back of like elephants and horses and like, okay, I'll see that stuff in a week. That's great. Or I could build roads. I could build train lines, and I'm going to be able to move those products to port super quick. What's going to happen to the price of goods the faster I can get it from where it's made to where it's going? What's going to happen to the price?
Oh, it's going to decrease.
It's going to decrease. Like if my choice is, oh, I'm going to put it on the back of elephants and we'll just like hopefully make it through like this rickety road, or we're just going to put it in the back of a train and we have steam power moving this stuff all across. This is just going to really actually make me, the British, more profit. So again, they're not building and changing India because of their deep-seated love for the Indian people. The why on your handout, to move raw products to market. That's why they're building all this infrastructure. It benefits them. In general, we don't do stuff that generally doesn't benefit us as a nation. This is supposedly going to benefit the British by helping these products get to market. Below that, another benefit to the empire, not only is there infrastructure being built, but also I can have a real solid job. It says if I have a job as a sepoy, again, a sepoy you should be able to identify is a Indian soldier working for the British. It says on your handout there's actually 200,000 people with these jobs. That's a big job. That's a good amount of people. We're going to write down that they were paid more than the average Indian. We'll write down they were paid more than the average Indian, these sepoys. So even though I'm working for maybe what you would call the bad guys, even though I'm working for people who have come into India and conquered, listen, I'm going to do that because if I didn't, I'd just be making like nothing, like the guy next door. So these sepoys see there are job opportunities in working for the British. And the British, it says on the handout, by 1870, because of all this investment into India, they had the largest, you'll write down, rail network in Asia. They had the largest rail network in Asia. They had more train lines in India than any other Asian country on the planet. That's good. In fact, this lack of modernizations is what really got China in trouble. China still has guys fighting with like spears in the 1800s. That's why they get dominated. That's why they lose the Opium Wars. In fact, India has so much infrastructure, we're going to write down they had the 5th largest on the planet. 5th largest rail network is what we're making reference to. That means that India had more train lines than most European countries. The British have put a lot into India. In fact, so many miles of rail have gone into India that we'll write down people were making 18 million trips a year in India. That's a lot. And that's great in so many ways. But what is a bad thing that a person could get on a train from Mumbai and be eventually in a city like Delhi? What's a bad thing about that? I'm moving quickly, millions of people across hundreds of miles. What also can move quickly? Yeah, negative impact will write down disease, our old friend that changes history and is changing us now, even with some students doing learning at home or just skipping randomly at home. On the handout, there are positives though. A couple of the positives that says the British built modern sewage system which reduces disease. It turns out that waterborne illness is one of the most deadly things that we can experience. We can get, if we have fecal material in our water, we can get cholera. In fact, when we had snowpocalypse back in February, was that February or January? When was that? Whenever it was, when it got cold, if they lost electricity, what did you have to do to your water before they wanted you to drink or even brush your teeth with it? You could have done that, but after they lost power, they asked us all to do something before drinking our water.
Boil our water?
Boil, right? There was a boil warning to kill the harmful bacteria that may not have been adequately processed and treated. And that's why if you ever go to like a lot of countries, like in Africa, you don't ever drink the water or let the water in the shower get in your mouth. It's not okay. Disease is a real common thing. I have a friend who lives in Uganda. He just shared with me a story that in Uganda, they have snow cone trucks like we do. You know, like you go, it's hot day. It's like 5 cents for a snow cone there. So kids, even poor kids, go up and they get their snow cones and it's got, you know, whatever flavors, super popular. But the problem is the water is from tap water that they make the ice. And that means inside that ice is all the diseases that were not boiled out. These guys are not like, okay, before I start my snow cone business, let me boil all this water to make ice. They're just full on making the ice from the tap. So kids buy these 5 cent snow cones and they get typhoid, They get cholera, they get all these diseases because of that. And so the British realized this problem and they build the first modern sewage system. That's a positive for the Indian people. Another big change on the handout, it says agriculture. And it says on the handout that we see the transformation of agriculture. In fact, the British have 4 things they really want the Indian people to grow. These 4 things include things that are old-time favorites for white Europeans to desire, and also include things that are really indicative of the influence of capitalism. Capitalism produces a consumer culture where you just want more and more products. For example, what kind of 4 products can we write down that the British will want India to grow? Sugar. That's one of the most standard things. Can't grow sugar in Europe. It's too cold in Europe. But India is perfectly suited, and we like sweet stuff, so sugar is on the list. What else? Not really tobacco as a major thing. You don't grow salt. That's a mineral. It's the only rock humans eat is salt. That's right. We do see a little bit of that, but cotton is a huge thing because capitalism makes a consumer society. When you guys have a birthday or when you have Christmas, I would bet you're not hoping for toys. You're probably hoping for clothes, right? That's because you and I live in a consumer society where we have so much clothes in our closet, we don't even wear the clothes or the shoes we own. That's because of capitalism. And the British are the same way. They want clothing, and the best way to get clothing is make more cotton. 2 beverages that are important as well. What else? They're beverages. You don't grow water. Tea.
Coffee.
And coffee. For some reason, the British have not embraced coffee like we have. They have foolishly chosen tea, which is fine. But by comparison, the British and a lot of Africans. Below that, the Sepoy Rebellion. So it turns out that the Sepoys, these Indian soldiers working for the British Empire, are going to get a bit fed up with how they feel that they are being treated. And so we see that there's some issues of cultural insensitivity. If we have white Europeans living in India for the first time, they don't know the culture, they don't know the language, they don't know the beliefs, the chance that you're going to offend someone is pretty high. And so one of the things that happens is we see the Sepoys getting so upset that they actually use the guns the British gave them to rebel. It says on the handout, well-armed soldiers for the first time were in a reasonable place to rebel. When I mean that they're in a reasonable place, these Sepoys actually have good guns because who gave them those guns? The British did. So, and actually, I don't know if you remember on the other page, it actually says there's 200,000 of these Indian soldiers. I don't know if you want to make 200,000 Indian soldiers upset by being a jerk because there's so many of them, and we literally gave them the guns. So what causes the big problem? What causes Sepoys, these Indian soldiers working for the British, to want to rebel? Well, the second line tells us, and we're going to write something kind of funny on that line. We're going to write pig and cow fat. Pig and cow fat caused them to want to rebel. So imagine, like, even today, like if someone gives you a candy bar, like a candy bar or something packaged in a wrapper, and you can't open the wrapper. You try. They even put the little line where you're supposed to tear, and you try, but you can't. If you can't open a package, even though it has a little dash line, what do you use to open up a package? Your teeth, right? Okay, if you don't have a knife, Samantha, I might have to check you now for saying that. If you don't have a knife in your wallet or your purse or your little checkered bag, if you don't have a knife there, you might use your teeth, right? And that's not like a crazy thing. You just take it out of your teeth and you use it to tear. Well, it turns out the British hired these soldiers, the Sepoys, and they had ammunition cartridges. And when you're shooting your gun, you have to reload. and they told them, when you reload, what we need you to do is you need to take your teeth and you use your teeth to open these packages. Well, there's a problem though, because it turns out that these packages were covered, like robbing a bank later or committing some sort of crime. So it looks like there's a surveillance video. This is like, you'll get an email. Have you seen this student? Do you know who this person is?
If I give you $20 to go towards your expedition,
so it turns out that the British give the Indians these ammunition cartridges and say, hey, you know what? Whenever you want to like reload, you just take this package to your mouth, you rip it open, you're gonna be able to reload your gun. Well, that's a problem because this cartridge has pig and cow fat. The pig is an animal that's prohibited by one of the two religions in India. Which religion? No.
Oh, no.
Pig is prohibited
Like pork, you can't eat pork.
in Islam.
Yeah,
Muslims cannot eat pork products. They think pigs are evil. They are terrible. Actually, there's a story in Islam because Islam. Okay, so before we get to Hindus, Islam believes in Jesus, but Jesus is not God, and Jesus didn't die on the cross. There's a story in Islam that says at the end of the world, Jesus is coming back, but when Jesus comes back, he is coming back and he is going to actually destroy all the crosses that exist and all the pigs. Because for Muslims, they believe that Christianity is wrong to believe Jesus died on the cross, and they are doubly wrong to believe that Jesus was, or doubly wrong to actually think that pork is okay. They would say pork is definitely not okay. So that's not good for the Muslims. And a sacred animal in Hinduism is, guess what animal?
cow.
So it seems like the British have found a way to offend Sepoys that are both Muslim and Sepoys that are Hindu. The British say, what's the big deal? We're not asking you to eat it. The Sepoys say, it's kind of a big deal. It feels like you disrespect us. Like you came to our country, you came to our land, and you haven't even like bothered to like come to a basic sense of mutual respect. There's a second thing that upsets the Sepoys. And it says on your handout, deployment abroad. We're going to write down they had to fight outside of India. They had to fight outside of India. This is not something that they had ever signed up for. The Sepoys never signed up to fight outside of India. And the British are asking them to do that. It would be like if Cameron got a job at Walmart as a security guy. There's like two jobs for security at Walmart. Your first job is like to check receipts like in the front of the store, or there's always that security guard like on the random side of the building where there's a fire exit. Probably because people like grab stuff and run out that fire exit. So there's like a security guard that just stands there. If Cameron got that job as a Walmart security guard and said, hey, you're doing a great job, Cameron, but Walmart needs you for a greater position. Cameron, Walmart needs you in Afghanistan. And like he's like, I signed up like for $9 an hour to be the security guard, not to like do a tour in Kandahar. Well, that would be a shocking change. And that's the same thing that happened to the Sepoys. The Sepoys felt like, yeah, you hired me to work in India. I don't think it's appropriate or right for you to send me to Afghanistan. So this is a problem. They were asked to fight outside of India. This upsets them. There's a third thing that upsets them, and we're going to write down there was the outline of the sati. If you don't know how to spell sati, it's on the board with the letter S. They outlaw sati. You might remember in India, this was a ritual that let's say that you get married, and let's say that your husband dies. There's various ways that you can honor your husband, but the best way to honor your husband is for you, when your husband dies, they usually cremate his body. What we want you to do to honor him is while his body's burning, you should throw your body on his burning body. We actually want you to commit ritual suicide as a way of, I mean, because like, is it really honoring your husband to remarry? I mean, if you were to get remarried, that's true, but you can still honor him. And listen, by you remarrying another man, it's almost like you can replace your husband and he's irreplaceable. So there was a ritual, this is only for women, like if a man died and his wife died, he could get remarried. But it's only for wives. It's only for widows. And so this was a not uncommon practice. Well, the British look at this, and the British are Christian, and there's things they can tolerate. Hey, I can tolerate you have a statue of an elephant that you work. Okay, that's different. I don't believe in that, but I can work with that. I cannot, the British argue, work with you having widows committing suicide by being burned alive.
Yeah.
I can't do that. There's another thing they outlaw. It says on the handout, marriage, they outlawed child marriage. What I mean by this is that you would have 6-year-olds, you would have 8-year-olds get married to like a 40-year-old. Now, they would get married, but they would not consummate the marriage. Consummate means a sex act. So you'd be 6 or 8 and you would get married to a 40-year-old, but you wouldn't consummate that marriage until you went through something that would qualify you a period, right? So you don't have to worry about having sex with that man when you're 6, but maybe when you're 12, that would be a legitimate relationship. Now the British look at this and say, we can deal with a lot, but we cannot justify child marriage. And so this is another thing. Now, some Indian people are like, you are literally challenging foundations of our culture. You're telling us to eat stuff we can't eat. You're sending us outside of India. You are outlawing funeral practices we've done forever. You're outlawing marriage practices we've done forever. But there is yet another thing the British do that upset the Indian people. And it says on the handout, the Indian service. So it turns out that when the British take over India, there's a lot of government jobs. It turns out that we need tax collectors, we need people to keep records, we need people to work in the government. And there's two choices. I could either hire smart local Indians. These are well-educated brown people who work in India, well-educated native people, or I could say, I don't know if we could really trust Indian people to run India. Better bring white people over from England. It doesn't make sense to ignore the millions of educated, literate Indians, but they did. It doesn't make sense that for every government job, they would say, I would rather bring a white person from thousands of miles away to India, but they did. And so we'll write down where it says the Indian Civil Service, few Indians were hired. Few Indians were hired. And that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that we're in India. We've been actually our own country for 1,000 years, and you're saying that there's not one or two of us that are capable of doing the job of some white guy from England who literally showed up 2 weeks ago. How does that make sense? All of these things lead the Sepoys to rise up with the guns that they've been given and the training that they've received to rise up against the British. This is called the Sepoy Rebellion. We said cow fat, pig fat, deployment abroad, outlawing sati, marriage, child marriage outlawed, and then the injustice of the Indian civil service leads to the rebellion. Ultimately, we're going to write down the rebellion was a failure. Ultimately, the rebellion was a failure. Couple pictures to look at. This first picture on the screen, this is a picture of a woman. This woman is not happy. She represents actually the British. Hey, Cameron, will you stop playing your game? Super driving me crazy. I know, super important. The electronic, chupon, addictive. On the picture, the woman represents the British Empire. She's not happy. She's got two things in her hand. What are those two things? Sword and a shield. If you look at the shield, there's something on that shield. What symbol is that?
Oh, it looks like a
Looks
pendulum.
like a balance beam.
Yeah, it's the things that you weigh things out like a scale. And sometimes in America, you see that like in juries or judge in the court system. And actually, right here, this woman representing the British people, she is about to give justice to the Indian people. Because you know what the Indian people did? From the British point of view, we built them train lines, we built them roads, we gave them order, we invested in them, we gave them jobs. And you know what the Indian people did to us, the British Empire? They rebelled. And so take a look at what the British Empire is doing. She is stepping on these rebellious brown bodies because they rose up, because the Sepoys rebelled. And it's not wrong what she's doing. In fact, the title of this cartoon is called Justice. By me stepping on these broken brown bodies, I am giving them actually what they deserve. I've invested in India and they rose up against us. We're the good guys here. We're giving them justice. The second image has two great cats, a lion and a tiger. One of those great cats is indigenous to India. Which one is that?
The tiger.
The tiger. And so the tiger then represents India. And the lion represents Great Britain. And the lion is on the attack here, but listen, the lion is not the villain. The tiger is. What is the tiger trying to do?
Eat that poor lady.
That poor lady represents the British Empire in India. That poor lady, look, we built train lines, we built roads for them, I gave them a job, and they rose up against us with the guns we gave them. Actually, if there's a good person in this, it's the British. They're the good ones.
Oh my God.
The British have to take care of business. Not only did this rebellion fail, on that same line, I want you to write down thousands were executed. And that's what's happening in this picture. These are sepoys who dared to rise up against the British. They are executed. Thousands were executed. And in ways that are kind of horrific. In this painting, you have these red-coated British soldiers still wearing the red coats, just different hats. And what have they done to these sepoys? And they are going to be shot from these cannons. Those cannons are going to go off. They're going to literally, they're going to explode. This is a horrific thing, but they do this to thousands of Indians, killing them through hanging, through execution, because the...
Oh my God.
So, I don't know if creative...
Is the right word for this?
You could say cruel. You could say, a lot of things, not creative. But this is what the British do. They execute these sepoys. On the handout, there are three big goals that the British pursue in their desire to make India their own. And these are things that we've talked about all but one of them. But where it says British goals, we'll write down Westernization. And when we talk about Westernization, we're talking about making it more Western. Western here means like Western Europe. Western here means like America, like the United States. We also see a second goal, the goal of modernization. And one of the big themes that you should notice and remember is the countries that do well are the countries that modernize, and the countries that don't do well are the ones that refuse to do so, like China, exactly. And the third is a new word that we've never used before. It's on the board. It is the word Anglicanization. So that's the word Anglican, which is Anglican, Anglican. and then with ization, Anglicanization. And as Samantha correctly points out, that's the Anglican Church. That is the type of Christian church they have in England. Another word for the Anglican Church is the Church of England. So they want to help these Indians become Christian. They're not going to have a lot of success, but when they stop things like sati, which is widow ritual suicide, when they stop child marriage, these are examples of the Anglican faith making a difference. In Africa, what did they put an end to because of their Christian faith?
The British?
Yeah.
Slavery.
They did. They got rid of the slave trade. You might remember we talked about they had this phase where there was these evangelicals who came in. The British make their Christianity a part of their life. Below that, economic changes. There's something that the British want the Indians to start growing, specifically, not to send it to England, it would be a disaster, but to send it to China. What is that? There's something that the British want the Indians to grow so they can send it, not to Great Britain. That would be a disaster, but to send it to China.
Opium?
Yeah, it's opium. That's a good job, Logan. So we see on the handout economic changes. We see the production of opium for export to China. Opium's a drug, highly addictive. You smoke it, it destroys your life. You get so addicted, all you want is to smoke more opium. Well, opium is incredibly profitable. I don't want to send that to England. It will destroy us, but I do want to send it to China. Another change on your handout is they also destroyed the textile industry. We've mentioned this earlier. Remember textile industry? That is like making cloth. It used to be all the cloth, the best cloth in the world came from India. But it turns out if you have like some woman with a spinning wheel making cloth at home, what's going to be the cost of that cloth? Super expensive, right? Like she's literally making it with a spinning wheel. Well, it says on the handout that the British don't want this raw cloth anymore because there's something that they have that can make it way faster than that talented grandma with her spinning wheel.
Little kids on machines.
Yeah, absolutely. It says on the handout that they destroyed the textile industry and they actually moved, it says on the handout, to raw Indian cotton. Raw cotton means it hasn't been processed, means I haven't made clothing out of it, means that woman hasn't spun it into anything. The British tell the Indians, hey, thanks for the clothes for the last few hundred years, but we don't want that anymore. I actually just want one thing from you. I just want you to go pick that cotton, send it to us, we'll take it from here. The reason why European clothing was cheaper, you're going to write down the Industrial Revolution. That's why it was cheaper. If I have a choice between a machine that needs no break, a machine that can run 24 hours, or a woman doing it by hand, it's obvious the Europeans are going to get it done for cheaper. That's good for me, the Europeans argue, but who's that bad for? The Indians, because I used to have a good job. I'm not. In fact, I can now go from making good money, making clothing, to being a random faceless cotton picker that's not going to be making any money. Not good. It says on the handout, we see through all these frustrations the rise, the start of Indian nationalism, which is pride in an Indian identity. Pride in an Indian identity. Because the Indian people are so upset, they start to turn to believing that maybe we have a role to play in claiming our freedom back from the British. We're going to do this last section We have 9 minutes last section. We won't finish the back side, but we will finish this. We'll turn this in for a grade, or you can send me a picture of your stuff at home and we'll turn that in for a grade. We have this woman on the handout, and this woman is actually Queen Victoria. There's been three big names. Three big names to know. We had Queen Elizabeth, which we saw different things from her early on. She was Henry VIII's daughter. This is Queen Victoria, who lasted and ruled for a long time. And we have the modern Queen of England today, which is Queen Elizabeth II. Her husband just died at age 99.
Look at her eyebrow.
Perfectly shaped.
Right. Where you come from?
Yeah.
It says on the handout, it says, hey, don't you
That's actually a good thing back then.
don't you body
They
shame?
showed
no,
that
back
they had
then-
money.
Back then, they had, yeah, it was less necessary, so they had money to eat.
If you're-
She was a baddie back then, Mr. LeCon.
She was a baddie.
She was a baddie.
What about all the people in the village? Was there even villages?
I had my black teeth.
It says on the handout that Queen Victoria became Empress of India. So this woman is one of the most important people on the planet. And she is now the ruler of a country she's never been to and a country that she will never go to. She's the Empress of India.
And she's just that much of a baddie that she like.
Well, when we look at a map of the British Empire,
Not for real.
where it's
Oh, check out little boy.
we look at a map of the British Empire, everything in pink is what Queen Victoria is going to lay hold of, right? She's super important.
Okay, so Queen was this one.
Queen Victoria, super influential.
Was she like that,
At first.
Well, I mean, this depends on if you're Indian, you might look at her and say, yeah, she literally took our freedom away. If you're British, you're like, no, she extended. It's kind of like the three pigs. It's like the big bad wolf. Maybe from your point of view, one's good, one's bad.
So it's like the British, she was a baddie, and to the Indians, she was not bad.
It says on the handout that in the attempt to solidify British rule, we write down they brought British law. They brought British law. There's some good things about British law. For example, you might remember that the British are a type of democracy. They have actually an English Bill of Rights. There's some good things about British law, but definitely a whole lot of bad. And so on the handout, I'm going to give you an example of the bad. As I mentioned moments ago, there's something called the Indian Civil Service. As I mentioned moments ago, these are the workers and the managers of the British Empire. Most of the people that got jobs for the Indian Civil Service were white. Most of the people who got jobs for the Indian Civil Service were not from India. Most of them came from England. They went to schools like Oxford or Cambridge and then moved to a country that they'd been to for their first time ever before they started working there. We're going to write down on the handout, on the blank, only one Indian by 1870. Of the tens of thousands, listen up, of the tens of thousands of government workers, there was only one Indian by 1870.
Who was the one? Sure, he's like got a thing.
Yeah, I'm sure he's famous. I don't know. But the reason was racism. In fact, the quotation tells you, however clever a native Indian may be, I believe no rank we can give him would cause him to be considered an equal with a British officer. In other words, no matter how smart this brown-skinned Indian person is, you'll never have a brown person equal to a white person. The British argued it would be better to bring white people from England thousands of miles away to make them work in the government in India. This is a problem. But there is also another problem, this time for the British. There are still rich Indian people. And it says on the handout, Indian elite, it says, there's a growing importance to educate the existing elite class of Indians. The idea of partnering with them to extend legitimacy to the British presence and the import of Western language schools. They start to educate rich Indians, and rich Indians start to go to English-speaking schools. If I go to an English-speaking school, I'm going to go and I'm going to have history class. I'm going to learn all about the history of the white world. I'm going to learn all about British history. I'm going to learn about what's called the Magna Carta. I'm going to learn about Parliament. I'm going to learn all about the English Bill of Rights. I'm also going to learn about something called the Enlightenment, about guys like John Locke, things called inalienable rights. A guy named Rousseau who said there's a social contract, and when your government breaks their end of the social contract, I have the right to do what? Rebel. What is ironic about me, an Indian elite, going to a white British-run school and learning about English history and learning about things like democracy? What is odd about that?
You don't,
I don't have rights.
yeah, you don't have no rights.
You're
I
teaching.
don't have rights.
Here's the thing. You are teaching me that your culture is better than mine. Okay, I'm listening. And your culture includes something called the Enlightenment. Your culture includes something that says if your government is oppressive to you, I have the right to rebel. Your government says all people are created equal. What's ironic about this is you're teaching me about your Western culture, but I'm not experiencing your Western culture. There is hypocrisy. There's something incomplete. And I'm now educating the smartest Indians with these ideas they're going to end up using against the British Empire. People like Gandhi are going to be putting two and two together and saying, this doesn't make sense. Last line, then we're done for the day. Turning in, we have something called the Indian National Congress. These are Western educated Indian elites. These are rich Indians who've gone through British schools. They've learned all about Western culture. These are the guys who are going to be leading the independence movement. These are Western educated Indian elites. And these guys are going to ask those awkward questions. Why don't we have democracy? We're going to stop right there. You can make sure that you turn in your stuff. If you are not here physically, take a picture of your pages and send it to me, and I'm going to give you a grade. We're done for the day. No homework tonight. Have a great time. Thanks, Logan, for joining.